4 years ago, I was making like 50,000, and now I'm making 3, 4 times that with all the stock and everything. So a sales engineer steps in and again listens. They learn deeply about the business and what matters to the business. One of my favorite questions to ask as a solutions engineer is, how do you make money? And if you could wave a magic wand, what would you do? Or how would this work?
All right, in today's episode, we have Jeremy, who is a senior solutions engineer at HubSpot. Welcome to the show, Jeremy.
Thank you very much, Felix. I'm happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so first of all, your background is actually not in solution engineering necessarily. It was in a back-end coding role, and you had different kind of careers leading up into your position now as a solutions engineer. Tell us more about that career progression, like maybe why you made the certain decisions to move towards a solutions engineering role instead.
Yeah, great question. So I went to school for computer engineering. For those that don't know, computer engineering is a mix of CS, computer science, and electrical engineering. I wasn't really sure exactly what I wanted to do with it, but I knew I liked computers, and I was like, all right, let's rock and roll. So right out of school, I got my first job at a software company, a SaaS company called Commerce Hub. I still remember that first job offer and like going from like literally having like pennies in my bank account to, I think the first offer was like 65,000, and I was like, whoa, like life is starting. Like this is crazy. So that was cool. I would say within 12 to 18 months, I was a DevOps engineer. I learned pretty quickly that like being a developer was not really my forte. I'm much more people focused type of person. Like I love front end interaction, sales interaction, stuff like that. So about halfway through my time there, I was starting to look around and see if there was ways to transition. I really liked the company I was at. I really enjoyed the peers that I had, and I learned a ton from them. But I'd really love to go to a more customer-facing role from here. But I knew very little about the corporate space at the time. But one of the guys I worked with essentially said, hey, with your mix of technical background and what you want to do on the people side, you'd probably be a really great sales engineer. And so that was like the first light bulb that went off. I didn't even know what it was at the time. So I did a ton of research. I started talking to some people, reached out to people on LinkedIn. This was like 2017 when that happened. And then basically fast forward another year and a half, I got fired from that role. That was rough. So when I got let go from that role, I kind of bounced around to a couple of different things. I had kind of like an interim role at a small kind of mom and pop like IT company where I was doing a little bit of customer facing stuff. Like I was doing more like, setups of like infrastructure for small businesses. And so that was cool. And then went into like a straight sales role because basically this whole time I was applying to sales engineering roles and I wasn't getting very far in any interviews. I would get maybe a first interview or not even a callback. And the consistent feedback that I was getting was basically like, hey, you've got great technical experience, but you have no sales experience, like no corporate sales experience at least. So I had, a couple of my own like little small businesses and stuff. So basically from there, I decided, the next best thing for me, I was actually trying to apply to a sales engineering role, and then a company offered me like an account executive role. And I was like, you know what? Screw it. Let's try it. I think this is a good step in my career progression. Like, get some experience, some sales experience under my belt. And I did that, spent about like 8 months in that role. And then I was still kind of applying around. And then a friend I went to college with worked at HubSpot, and I saw that they were hiring for solutions engineers. I reached out to him. I started the interview process and it ended up working out. But it was like, I didn't get hired at HubSpot until 2021. So it was like between 4 and 5 years between like finding out about solutions engineering and getting that role. So that'd be a piece of advice I give people, like be patient. It might take some time. You might need to get different experience in order to be able to fit into that role, but just a little 2 cents on that.
Yeah, that is great that you had the persistence to keep on working towards something that you knew that you would like. So speaking of that, what made you realize, or what did you specifically like about these kind of client-facing or sales roles? Like, what did you like about that you just didn't get from more of like the engineering-heavy role that you had before?
Yeah, great question. So I love talking to people and just breaking stuff down with them. I think the thing that excites me the most, and I'm constantly trying to work closer towards this. But for me personally, I love working with somebody like a small business, and I'm on a small business team right now, so it definitely gets to scratch that itch. But I love working with like a small business owner who is doing, let's say, a couple $1 million in revenue, making some good progress, and this is a lot of what I do today, but they have some big holes or some big problems that they're trying to solve, and currently they don't know how to solve them. And so like I love the fact that I am able to use my not only my technical background and experience, but also just the fact that I can kind of bridge the gap with them. Like I really love the problem solving aspect. So it's like, how can technology help us solve a real world problem that's going to help a small business hire more people, or maybe feed his family, or do something great for the community? Like I think that personally is very exciting to me. So that's why, yeah.
Yeah, I like that you talk about this almost like you have to shift your approach to problem solving when you are in a sales engineer role. And I think you hit the nail on the head where engineers typically are overly technical, maybe geek out on the technical like solutions about that they have to offer, but not so much thinking about the business problem from the perspective of the client. Can you give almost an example of how maybe a sales engineer would approach a problem from like a client versus how like a software engineer might do, just to highlight the difference in how you should think about a problem when you are thinking about stepping into a sales engineer kind of role?
Yeah, great question. And I would like to just add a little caveat there that I'm not saying like all software engineers are just focused on diving in and geeking out on stuff, because I think that would be a broad generalization. But I would say I've definitely seen some of that. But I think the difference is that a sales engineer steps in and again listens. They learn deeply about the business and what matters to the business. One of my favorite questions to ask as a solutions engineer is, how do you make money? And if you could wave a magic wand, what would you do? Or how would this work? Like if you could just abracadabra alakazam, like how would you fix all this if it could just work perfectly? And so I think those are two really key questions, because one, understanding how the customer or the end user is making money is important to their business, and you're trying to, you typically, that's one of the main drivers of pain for them. They're trying to scale their business, and then understanding how they would fix things, and then they're going to articulate things to you, and then you'll probably make, like me as a solutions engineer, like if I hear them saying, for example, like just have good visibility into all of our quoting metrics. We would love for it just like whenever we need that data for it to just appear. For me, I'm hearing, okay, they need an integration between QuickBooks and HubSpot, for example, and that will automatically sync all the data, and they can do reporting and all that stuff. And I can articulate that after they've explained that to me. And so I would say the difference between that and like a software engineer, like you asked before, is I think, again, having been in that role as well, like you start like going down your own rabbit hole. We do the same thing, but they kind of sometimes do that in a silo where it's like, hey, I think this might be what the customer might want, and I'll just build all this cool stuff, and this is cool because, I don't know, I'm just enjoying this, and instead of, again, just making sure it's related to real world problems. So
Yeah, I think it's almost like I think a sales engineer or a salesperson cares about meeting the customer like where they're at, while I think an engineer thinks about this grand vision of like how this could be the best optimized version and try to sell that. And I think that turns off a lot of people that only care about the business problem, the problem at hand, not so much about like what's the ultimate solution that might not even they might not ever need. So you were interviewing for these kind of roles, and for anyone else that's thinking about transitioning from a more technical role like a software engineer into sales engineering, you found out that the feedback was that the sales part mattered more than the technical engineering kind of skill set. Can you speak more to that?
yeah, and I don't want to say that's always the case, but I think that was the case for me. I like to talk about engineering, and I think most jobs are probably like this, but I would say sales engineering, there's like a spectrum. And the spectrum is like 0 is like no technical aptitude needed or almost none. And then 10 is like staff level engineering technical aptitude needed. And I would say different jobs require different technical aptitude. So like if I wanted to be a sales engineer, maybe at like AWS, I need to be extremely technical. I need to be able to get into the product. I need to be able to run live demos, answer questions, probably be coding things on the fly on a call with a customer. Personally, that's not me. Like I like to be much more high level, much more business minded. So I would say HubSpot on a scale of like 0 to 10, just transparently as a sales engineer, is probably definitely on the lower end. Probably like between, I would say, 2 and 3, somewhere in there, because it's a marketing platform. It's meant, the whole point of HubSpot is that it's extremely user friendly, easy to use. easy to implement. So naturally, there's going to be less technical chops needed.
When you were preparing, or rather when you were kind of upskilling so that you would look more attractive to hiring managers, you actually took this detour into sales, and you had like an account executive role. You were actually doing the selling itself, which is very different than, let's say, an engineering or a solutions engineer, or rather than a software engineer. So would you recommend that approach to other people? Like, would they need to get some kind of sales experience before applying for jobs that are like sales engineer kind of roles?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think it depends on the person and it depends on the feedback you're getting, right? So like for me, I was applying for sales engineering roles for a period of years at that point, like on and off. Sometimes we're more intense, sometimes we're less intense, but I was consistently kind of getting the same feedback. And so finally I was just like, I need to dive in. So again, it depends at the end of the day, like kind of what your own experience is. But if you don't have any sales, like true customer facing sales experience, I think I would highly recommend it because it's just different. You think about things completely differently. You have to get in the trenches. You're cold calling people. You're working on your people skills, account management skills, sales skills, negotiation, contract management, stakeholder management. There's so many different things. And it's cool that they mesh together so well. I think one other thing that I always say to people is hiring managers want to give you a shot, but like you have to give them a reasonable doubt that you're going to succeed in the role. They don't want to just hire a straight software engineer as a sales engineer and have them flounder and then it makes them look terrible. So you have to give them something to go on when they go back to their hiring team and say, hey, I want to hire this guy. Like this makes sense because of this career progression. And so I think me adding that step, at least for myself, definitely made it much more palatable to a hiring manager to say, hey, let's give this guy a chance. Like this seems like a logical next step. He's got a little bit of sales. He's got the engineering. If we bring them together, it's, sales engineering. So
yeah, you brought up a good point earlier about how there's a spectrum, a range of how technical you need to be, or maybe how much more important the soft skills and the sales skills are necessary, depending on the kind of product that you're ultimately selling. Would you think it's accurate to say that if you have no sales experience and you just have a background in, let's say, as a software engineer, to apply for the more technically demanding sales engineer kind of roles where they might prioritize just like an entry, like a kind of foot in the door into sales engineering, to look for the more technical ones that might match your skill set more versus the ones that require more of the soft skills, the kind of background that you eventually went to go get first?
I think 100%, like like if you spent, let's say, a few years as a software engineer and you want to go and get a pretty technical, like I said, like the example, like let's say you worked at a company and you had a bunch of AWS experience and you wanted to go get a job as an AWS sales engineer, chances are you're probably going to have a pretty good shot at getting that role if you can at least interview well and they have pretty good vibe from you that you can talk and you have good phone presence and you're giving them. So I would say you have a much better chance if you have those sales skills. You don't necessarily have to have years of experience, but you have to at least be able to interview well, and when they're talking to you on the phone, they're like, okay, like we're confident, like at least having a conversation with this guy that he could do that. I think that's a good place to start. One other thing I recommend to people too is that just be looking at ways to parlay your skills and combine them with other things to get you to your goal of sales engineering, if that is your goal. So,
and just want to kind of clarify one definition real quick. I've heard the word sales engineer, solutions engineer. Is there a difference between the two roles, or is that just kind of interchangeable between the two?
Great question. I would say they're pretty much interchangeable. There's a lot of different roles out there that are pretty similar. So sales engineer, solutions consultant, solutions architect, to name a few. I'm trying to think if there's any other ones that I can think of. Those are probably the main four that I would say are pretty synonymous. Typically, solutions architects are a little bit more senior. Like our company, we have internal or inside sales engineers, which are more junior roles. So that's obviously another recommendation if there's any sort of junior sales engineering role where you're maybe doing less client-facing stuff to get your foot in the door. That's a great place to start. But yeah, I would say that's typically the title that role is given.
Makes sense. So what's the typical day-to-day like? Like who are you working with? What kind of work are you doing in a given day as a sales engineer?
I would say on a given day, I work on a small business team. So we work with customers, 25 employees or less. And our typical workflow would be a customer lead comes in. We have a direct sales rep that's working it internally. our threshold internally is you have to at least have, like, we don't just take any person. If we think there's a chance of them being a customer that's going to be spending more than $2,000 a month at HubSpot, that's when we come in. So if KMRR is our baseline threshold, sometimes we'll go a little bit below, but so if, let's say it's a customer come in based on their need, the sales rep will typically have a conversation with them, do a little bit of discovery, say, okay, based on what you're telling me, I think you're going to need approximately $3,000 worth of HubSpot per month. You've got some pretty technical use cases here, so I'm going to rope in a sales engineer. So our team just does like a round robin, so they'll send in a request, we get the request. If it gets a deal gets assigned to me, essentially the next step is I have a 15-minute internal conversation with the sales rep. We just kind of debrief on their initial conversation with the customer, try to get an idea of timeline, how quickly they're trying to move, any initial technical questions that they have, start to ask those questions like how do they make money, what kind of solution are they looking for, and then typically after that we'll go client facing. So then we'll just go client facing again, like obviously different deals move differently, but I would say a traditional deal is some sort of discovery and technical discovery between me and a sales rep jointly. We'll ask a lot of questions, try to really get a good understanding of what the business needs are. And then, because at the end of the day, that's the only reason people spend money is like there's some sort of pain in the business. So if there's a business pain that makes sense, we'll dig into it more. We'll try to make sure, again, we can articulate that business pain as well or better than the client. And then once we have that, the next step is building out the solution. So a lot of times, like I'm building out like architecture diagrams where it's like, okay, like this is your current process. And I think that's one of my favorite things to do is like, I'll build out like, okay, this is what your current process looks like. Customer calls in, you give them a quote, and then from the quoting process, you do some sort of back-end post-sale work. And then that's inefficient because of X. And then I'll show them how it would work with HubSpot and how that would increase the efficiencies. And it would also, decrease their pain, etc. So that's kind of like the day-to-day. And then so we'll have that call, and then typically we'll probably have one other technical call, and then there will be some sort of closing sales call. So sometimes I'm on those, sometimes I'm not. It kind of depends on the deal, but that's kind of a day-to-day.
So is the interview itself when you are going for these jobs like similar to these kind of the work experience that you go through when you are a sales engineer, or how is it structured?
I would say the beginning of the interviews are pretty similar to like any general interview. You have your phone screen, and then you'll have like kind of a behavioral interview. But once you kind of are making it towards the end of the interview process, typically, at least most roles that I've seen or interviewed for, they have some sort of component of that where they, at least especially for like the junior roles, are like they want to know that you can do it, or want to see you run a discovery call, or they want to see you run a demonstration of a product, whatever it is. It could be something simple like Gmail. How do you use Gmail? How does it integrate with different things? They want to see what your presentation skills are like, how you ask questions, how you do discovery. But yeah, I would say there's typically some component of that in most solutions engineering interview processes.
And can you share with us your salary progression since you got started? I know you mentioned that first job you got 65K, like you're making the real bucks and you can actually start design the life that you want. But since then, your salary has grown a lot. Tell us more about that progression.
So yeah, it started at 65 and then I got fired and then it dropped precipitously. I think I was making like right after that, it went down to maybe 20, 25 bucks an hour or something like that. So I was making like maybe 40 to 50, somewhere in there. And then I went to a sales job where I was making about the same, but then you had commission on top of it. So I made a little bit, probably between 50 and 70-ish, but I wasn't even there for a year. So then I went to HubSpot. The starting salary at the time for the solutions engineer role that I was applying to was $105,000. So that was obviously a pretty big jump. I was very excited. So 105, came in at 105, and then I think within 3 months, this was back in 2021, within 3 months of me being in the role, they readjusted all the salaries. It just happened to be a good time coming in, but they readjusted all the salaries. They do annual compensation reviews at HubSpot, and a lot of other companies do this too. But basically, due to inflation, et cetera, they readjusted all the salaries for the company to be in line with New York City salaries, which was amazing because I don't live in New York City. So then it bumped to like 120, like within 3 months. So that was great, like nice $15,000 bump. And then I got promoted once in my first year and then once in my second year. So the promotion scale went, it was a $10,000 bump for my first promotion. So that went to 130. And then at HubSpot, at least, I'm sure a lot of other software companies do this as well. There's usually some sort of, if it's a public company, there's typically some sort of equity compensation as well. So HubSpot's no different. They give out very generous. I think they do $35,000 in RSUs, at least for this role. They're different RSUs for different roles, but they give out 30, which is restricted stock units. So basically, those vest over a 3-year period. So I got, I got a $10,000 bump, and then 35 in RSUs. And then the following year, my second year, I got promoted again to a senior SE, which is what I am now. That was last year. And so now my OTE, on target earnings, so as long as the sales org is hitting their numbers, is 150,000. So it's basically, and that's another distinction, big difference between like working as a software engineer versus in a sales role. A software engineer might make 150,000, but that's like total salary, like it's all salary. There's no variable, whereas sales engineers typically are on some sort of variable. So you have like maybe usually it's 70 to 80% is salary, and then there's like a 25%, something like that, where it's a variable. So depending on like if the sales org is doing really poorly or your team, or so like ours is based on the individual or on the team, it's not the individual. So if the team is hitting their number, then you get paid. So basically the way it works, just to explain, it's like if the team hits their number of 100%, you get 100%. So if my 100% is 150, I get that 150. If they exceed their number, I get whatever that variable. If they exceed by 10%, I get 10% more than my variable. If they are 5% less, then I get 5% less of that variable. So that's kind of how that works. So 150, and we got lots of stock, which was great. So yeah, it's been great. So
that's amazing. Do you remember the feelings once you got these kind of promotions and all of a sudden, because it came pretty quickly, like your progression and your salary? Do you remember how you felt when you got those first paychecks, when you got those promotions, and all of a sudden you're making a lot more money than you were before?
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely exciting, relieving a lot. I think it wasn't so much the salary, because I mean I have other stuff on the side, and I'm by no means saying like I'm not thankful and grateful and pumped, but like we have a relatively good sized real estate portfolio my wife and I own as well. So it was less about the cash flow, but I think for me mentally, like getting fired, it really took me a long time to come back from that, like mentally, emotionally. And so like to come into a very prestigious company, HubSpot is a pretty difficult company to get into. I know the last time we hired a role on my team specifically, there was over 750 people that applied. And so to know that that's the kind of pedigree of people that come into this company, and to be a part of that and to work around all the smart people that I work around, and to know that I fit in and that I'm a top performer and I'm being promoted and I'm doing the things that I need to do. So I think that psychologically was the biggest thing for me. Obviously, getting a $20,000 pay bump is always really nice, but it's crazy to think about how much my life and salary and everything has changed in like 3-4 years. Like 4 years ago, I was making like 50,000, and now I'm making 3-4 times that with all the stock and everything. So
yeah, no, that validation, I think, is super important and undervalued, I think, and it's great that you call it out. So for a friend or family that sees all this success, like I want to be like Jeremy and I want to get into the kind of career he's in, I want to become a sales engineer, but they don't have any experience yet, like what questions would you ask them to figure out if it even would be a good fit for them?
So I'm on LinkedIn. I get a lot of people. I used to post a lot about like being a solutions engineer, sales engineer, and I would get a lot of questions. And I would say the number one question people ask is like, how do you get into this? I wasn't even planning on getting into this, but I feel like there's a ton of boot camps and stuff out there now for not only software engineering, but now sales engineering. And I think they kind of sell you this like, hey, anybody can get into this, anybody can do this, which I think there is some truth to that. But I think that's like saying anybody can go to the NBA. Obviously, if you're 6'7" and you're LeBron James, obviously it's going to be a little easier than if you're 5'1". So I think there's natural, or I don't want to say natural, but just if you have certain experiences, it's going to be easier. So like I think my transition to solutions engineering is going to be a lot, even though it took me some time, it's going to be a lot easier than somebody who like literally just came out of nursing. Like I get people who are like, hey, I've been a nurse for 10 years and I want to transition into solutions engineering. And it's like, great, you've got a lot of the things that you need. Like you obviously have worked with people a ton in your life. You're very empathetic. You can listen well, all that stuff, but there's still that's 50% of the job, but there's still the other 50% where you still need to be pretty technical person. You need to understand the technology and how to actually solve the problem. Like obviously being able to connect with the person and the problem is one, but the actual solution is just as important, so you can't have one without the other. So I guess to answer your question, like I think you have to have some at least technical experience would be ideal, but if not, if you don't have the experience, you need to have that draw or that drive towards that to learn that side, which I had a lot early on. and I learned a lot, and that uniquely positioned me to succeed later on. So if you don't have that, I would say, at least for me, that's maybe not for everybody, but for me, like the social side and the sales side came a lot easier than the technical side. Like that, the technical side is difficult. I feel like there's an element of we all have to talk to people in our day-to-day lives. So I don't know. I don't want to say that because obviously different people some people are very introverted and they don't like to do that and whatever. But yeah, I think the technical piece is an overlooked piece, and it could take you several years to get to a technical level where you're even relevant to certain companies. So I guess that'd be my thoughts on that.
Well, you mentioned an important word here, which is the introvert. Like, do you see that sales engineers typically are extroverted versus introverted? Does it hamper you, or is it not a good fit if you are more introverted?
I don't think so. I think I've seen people that are extremely successful that are both. I really think it just comes down to having a hunger to help solve problems, really. Like, of course, there are some things that are going to be easier if you're extroverted, but at the same time, like, I know plenty of people who are super extroverted, myself included, which is something I'm trying to work on every single day. Is like, I think it comes very easy to me to talk and maybe steamroll people a little bit and to just shut up and listen. So, and I think that's a huge superpower of people who are introverted. They naturally are quiet and they listen and can, again, reiterate and regurgitate back to the customer. That's the biggest piece. It's like you want to be able to articulate. I've mentioned this like 3 times in this call. Like, you want to be able to reiterate back to the client or customer their problem or pain better and show that you understand it better than they do. Like, that's the key. If you can do that, they feel understood. They feel like they can trust you. You're not just like the used car salesman, like, oh, buy a car, any car, like, come take this one, even though they want you to buy the red Ferrari when you have a family of 4 and a dog. It's like, no. They understand my pain, what I'm trying to do, what I'm trying to accomplish, that empathy. So yeah, I don't know if there's any like distinction between introvert, extrovert. It's really just, are you willing to shut up and listen and solve problems?
Yeah. That's good. You always wanted to, you had this goal for years to become a sales engineer, but was there something that you wish you knew before becoming a sales engineer once you stepped into that role and you're like, wow, this is different, or I wish I knew this before coming into the role?
I don't think so. I think everything I thought the role was going to be has been pretty much that. I think I had done a lot of research and talked to quite a few people who were sales or solutions engineers. And so I had a pretty good idea of kind of what the role would be. Obviously, I'm very thankful that I work at HubSpot. It's an incredible company. Like, they trained us super well. Like, I did 6 months, almost 6 months of onboarding and ramping before I was even allowed to like go client facing. So like they prep you really, really well. The only thing I think it stands out is I wish I'd done something like this sooner, but I was always working towards it. And I think everything happens in life for a reason. That's my philosophy. So.
Yeah. How do you see, like, I think there's a lot of fears and also a lot of use of AI in more software engineering roles, but do you see AI playing a role in sales engineering? Do you see something like happening today, or do you see it replacing jobs in the future? Like, what are your thoughts here?
I think that's a great question. I don't think that, maybe in the long term, I don't see that happening anytime soon. I still think there's a lot of drawbacks to AI, and I think the thing that we do as humans really well is our reasoning capacity, and we deal really well with very ambiguous, complex problems that have lots and lots of variables. Again, AI is great. Like, I use ChatGPT all the time. Like, hey, write me a letter or an email, or how do I solve this very like kind of straightforward thing? Like, what's the best way to do whatever XYZ? And it has that. But like, when it comes to, okay, I'm a business owner, I have limited funds, I am trying to accomplish this really random thing that hasn't really been done before, or, there's just like so much intricacy to that. I don't think people with legit industry experience are going to be replaced anytime soon, but that's just my take on that.
Yeah, and kind of pulling back from here a little bit, do you have any like hot takes about the sales engineering career? Like, what do you think some people might say that you disagree with, or something that you might say that a lot of people disagree with?
Hot take is, like I said, I mentioned the boot camps before. I struggle with that personally. Like, again, I've got a good friend of mine who runs a boot camp, and I think all the power to him. I think he's trying to do it right. But I think there are boot camps out there, and I'm sure you've probably seen them on the software engineering side too, where it's just kind of like they're trying to ram as many people through the boot camp as possible, trying to make as much money as possible. They're not really focused on the long-term career progression for the human and individual, and like ensuring their success and really providing value to that individual, I think they can be good, but I think also there's some out there that I don't think provide as much value. And I think a lot of people think that, oh, I'm going to pay $5,000 to go through this boot camp and then I will be a sales engineer. It's like, no, that's not how it works. So just because you spent 4 weeks in a boot camp doesn't mean you're ready to be a sales engineer. You're not going to beat someone out who's got, again, like somebody like myself. Like I had three years of DevOps experience. I had some sales experience. Like you're not going to come out of a boot camp and beat somebody like that, even if they don't have the boot camp under their belt.
I haven't seen them pop up too often, but I see them here and there now, which is interesting to see it because the software engineer boot camps really kind of exploded, and I'm curious what other kind of fields are going to follow in the same track. So thank you so much for your time, Jeremy. Again, a senior solutions engineer at HubSpot. Thank you so much for coming on, sharing your journey, your advice, and your experience with us.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Hope to come back again soon and share some more.